This is my house. This is my home. This is a picture of my mother and her younger brother that was painted in Berlin before they had to flee from the Nazis. My parents were refugees from Germany, and I was born in 1947 in New York City, in Manhattan at the time. The interest in finance began with an interest in politics as a study area, and I got a PhD, as you know, in Princeton. And what I found was that finance was actually very connected to politics and to power more generally. So I was interested in finance because I found that when you looked through finance, you understood a lot about the world. By the time I became Vice President and Treasurer, I was well enough known in the world's capital markets so that becoming Vice President and Treasurer, I got a lot of nice notes and congratulations, but it wasn't a surprise. I've been working with all of the major banks and all of the major capital markets. This is a picture of Ernie Stern with 3 women executive directors and me. That's the American Jan Piercy. This was the Dutch. She was terrific. I think women have much more acceptance as professionals today. They don't have to feel, as I did, that just their voice itself was a disturbing presence to some of the colleagues around them, because they had never heard a woman's voice except in their front office when somebody asked to come in. So that part is easier, I think. But I think rising to the top level, that's different. There was a time, I went to a conference in Amsterdam representing the bank. And there was a room with, I think, hundreds of people. And I was the only woman. And I came home and I said to my mother, she passed away when I was 40, so it was shortly before. I said, I'm quitting. This is it. I can't do this anymore. Just be the only woman. And she answered that you have a responsibility not to quit and to continue to do it, you know, because you're the only woman. Come over here. Look at all the tombstones up on the top. These are global bonds, including probably the first global bond. Let me look. I don't think that first bond changed the capital markets. What changed the capital markets was McNamara's speech in Nairobi, in which he declared his vision for what the World Bank would achieve. And that vision required a much larger balance sheet. And that balance sheet needed the liability side to be funded in the capital markets.
We should strive to eradicate absolute poverty by the end of this century. And that means in practice the elimination of malnutrition, illiteracy. It means the reduction of infant mortality. It means the raising of life expectancy standards to those of the developed nations within 3 decades.
The big breakthrough for us was that in all the old days, people thought a bond is a bond. You borrow a bond, that's what you have to lend, or that's what you have to invest, or whatever it is. We saw that the bond was actually a promissory note for a stream of payments. And it started in a currency, and it had to end in a currency. And then it had interest payments at certain intervals, including zero coupon bonds that had no interest payments, or perpetual bonds that had no termination date. But all that started to be played into, and that's when you started to think about swaps as a way to change the currency, or fixed rate to floating rate note swaps to change where you were on the yield curve, or working on getting into more and more capital markets so that you could have the lowest spread possible. When we went to Japan for a trip with Gene Rotberg, they would give us a book of photographs afterwards. So this is all of us. Here's Gene. Going to Japan for my first trip outside the United States was a very conscious decision. It is not that the Japanese invested in our bonds. We had investors all over the world. It was that the Japanese gave us so much access to their capital market, preferential access until capital markets really opened. We did the first samurai bond, which was a foreign borrower in Japan. We did the first daimyo bond. But all the first in entering as a foreigner in the capital market, and the first for being able to sell outside were with Japan. This is in Kyoto. Look at this hair. I think this was the hairdo where I had a permanent, which was ridiculous, and Ernie Stern said, "You look like you stuck your finger in an electric circuit." Which is not the kind of thing you're allowed to say today, but it was funny. I think within departments or even vice presidencies where I was working, the woman issue, again, was not terribly important. It was important to the women to see that this kind of progress was possible and at the World Bank. But in terms of your day-to-day relationships, you had human being relationships, right? My personal guiding philosophy was do not try to plan a career. Let it happen. Your best friend in that is curiosity. And again, if you're open to people around you, you'll see things that you perhaps hadn't thought about.